All right, g'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis. My name is Pietro. This is Max. How you doing, Max?
Pretty good, Pietro. How you doing?
I'm good. We're going to talk about money today. So I'm a happy man. I know lots about it, and I don't have much of it. That's kind of my relationship with money. How's your relationship with money, Max?
Don't know a lot about it, and don't have a lot of it either. So I may start crying.
So we're exactly the kind of people that you want to talk to you about money. People who don't know how to attain it.
This is financial advice.
Yeah, we're changing to the worst financial podcast of all time. So anyway, don't listen to our financial advice, but I can tell you what I can do. I can't tell you how to get money, or how to keep the value of your money. I can tell you how to try and keep the value of your money, but I can tell you why I'm poor. I can definitely tell you why I'm poor. And surprise, surprise, it's the government's fault. Just like everything in my life, I'm just a sour libertarian who blames the government for everything. That's kind of the stereotype of libertarians a little bit, I think.
Yep. Nothing to add to that. You, me, and however many people listen to this episode.
Yeah, so I can tell you why you're poor today, dear listener. You're spending your time wisely, because I'm going to give you some excuses as to why you're poor.
Maybe not poor, but maybe not as rich as you should be.
Well, poor and getting poorer. The bright the light at the end of the tunnel on this is that we're only getting poorer and it's only getting worse. So
I was trying to put a positive spin on it, but
yeah, you're poor and it's getting worse and there's nothing you can do about it, but you get to know why. No, there is something you can do about it. I suppose the point of this is that we need people to know exactly what's happening to their money and with money and what the government does to it. Because the only reason that the government gets away with it again and again and again is because most people don't know, and most people's attention spans are too short to kind of look back and remember and realize why maybe this is all happening and what people said at the time, and the kind of warning signs. And I think, we'll get into it, but the COVID response stuff throughout COVID, everyone was warning, you can't just shut down the economy. You can't just shut down the economy. You can't just shut down the economy. And now we're all like, why is there all this inflation? What the fuck?
Not just shut down the economy, but spend ludicrous amounts of money on unnecessary means like testing and all sorts of things.
Well, not just shut down the economy, but continue to pay everyone for doing nothing, like created a false economy where everyone just earns money. Anyway, we'll get into all of that. So we are doing another educational episode today. Hopefully it's of some use to you. The topic today, obviously, we're talking about money, but we're also talking about inflation and the role that central banks have in all of this, because central banks, the Federal Reserve in the US and the Reserve Bank of Australia here, are very much, if not the sole culprits, the mechanism that the government uses to impoverish its people and enrich itself and its friends. So let's start with kind of the basics. What is money? What do you reckon money is, Max?
Currently, it is made up and doesn't exist. It's just I don't know.
It definitely exists.
Well, a little sidetrack. Do you think all the money in people's banks is physical? Do you think they actually print it?
Print the money and put it in banks, like put little notes in people's accounts. Is that what you mean?
Well, yeah, it's sitting somewhere, like the central bank or the Federal Reserve. But if, let's say, there's billions and billions of dollars in people's bank accounts in the world,
yeah,
do you think that's all physical somewhere? Or do you think it's gone to the point where they're like, yeah, just printing money, but it's not actually being printed?
What do you mean physical? Like there's actual little banknotes that represent all that money?
Yes.
Like there's some rooms stacked wall to floor to ceiling with little banknotes?
Yeah.
Nah, that's 100% not true.
Exactly. That's what I was getting at.
Right. Is there actual notes to represent all the money?
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of a good point. And that's probably a good place to start, because that's what we assume
goes to the origin. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I'm going to go even further back than that. I'm going to start even further back than that. So like, let's go the history of kind of trade and mankind and exchange and barter, and where money was born. Because I mean, humans, the first things humans did when they started to realize that they were humans, they went fishing and hunting and tried to forage for food and stuff and started building things and innovating. The first thing they did wasn't, hey, let's create money. Let's just invent this thing. No, there were more pressing things that they could come up with. Money kind of came by itself, or currency rather. So originally, let's say, you know, I'm a farmer and you're what job do you want to have, Max?
Let's be a blacksmith.
Cool. You're a blacksmith. What do you make?
Knives.
Knives. Okay, you make knives. I farm carrots. It's an honest job. I don't know why you're laughing at me farming carrots.
Together we can chop up carrots.
Hey, and now you're getting into it.
Let's start a restaurant.
Before we could even do that, because no one would have anything to pay us at our restaurant for. But let's say, so I farm carrots. I have loads of carrots, but I need lots of other things. Like I can maybe eat carrots to survive, but then, you know, I'm freezing and in the cold and don't have a house and don't have clothes and don't have any of the other million things that we need and like to survive. So what can I do is maybe, so let's say maybe I want one of your knives because I could really use your knife to cut some carrots. Now, maybe you need carrots. Maybe you need carrots, but maybe you don't. Maybe you actually have another way of getting carrots, or you don't really like carrots, or whatever it is. So
no, I've got no food. All I've got is knives and bits of steel. I need some food.
Yes, you need some food, but let's say for the sake of this exercise, I don't necessarily have the thing that you need. Or maybe I have, all right, you need carrots. I give you carrots, I get a knife, but I also need some shoes. And the cobbler who makes shoes has enough carrots. They don't need carrots. So how do I give him something that he needs so I can get the shoes? And the way that this happens is I could go, all right, I'll give you some carrots and get a knife off you, get a second knife off you. And then I'll give knife to the cheese maker because I know the cheese maker wants a knife, and I'll get a wheel of cheese. And then I'll give the wheel of cheese to the cobbler because I know that he needs a wheel of cheese, and then he'll give me my shoes. It's a very convoluted process and incredibly difficult to sort of trade that way. So what people started doing was trading with commodities. So maybe something that is has some inherent value and lots of people find worthwhile. Now, tobacco leaves, for example, were a thing of the past, which I think they used in South America, which could be used as this. So everyone kind of likes and uses tobacco leaves over time. So instead of maybe just keeping all my carrots, I trade them for tobacco leaves. And I know that at any point, most people will need tobacco leaves, so I can trade them for things that I need. Tobacco leaves also aren't particularly lasting. They're easily damaged and they don't last all that long. So they can be a store of value, but it's not a great one. Through, you know, free market enterprise and people freely exchanging things and giving each other things and trying to find sources that are inherently valuable and durable and easy to divide into smaller pieces so that they could give a specific amount for the specific thing that they're trading. What emerged as the most efficient and effective sources of currency were gold and silver. So gold and silver, you know, historically, first of all, it's a finite amount. You can't use pebbles as a source of currency because anyone could just go to the beach and grab 1 billion pebbles. And then what, you're rich. Everyone has 1 billion pebbles. No one's going to trade anything for any amount of pebbles because they're worthless. But gold's a finite amount. It's also very easy to sort of divide into coins or smaller bits and pieces and whatever so that you can exchange a specific amount of it. And it's durable. It's not going to decay or rust or whatever. And so gold and silver became these sources of money. And that's how money was essentially, how currency and money was essentially born back in, you know, historic times. And gold remained the primary source of currency all around the world. So when you discover, you know, when the West would discover new civilizations, often money was already useful to them. Like everyone had sort of independently decided that gold was a really effective store of value. And this was done naturally in the free market because it turns out that gold is pretty consistent in being a really good store of value, gold or silver typically. Copper was used in some countries as well, but again, it's more abundant. So you need sort of, because it's so much more abundant, you need larger amounts and it's less transferable and whatnot. So anyway, that's the origins of money. Any questions so far? We're still doing the teacher-student thing from last time.
I'm not sure if I'm going to be as good a student as I was last episode. Well, yeah, like I might be jumping forward a little bit, but the piece of plastic that our notes are printed on nowadays, it's not worth $20. $20 note isn't worth $20. It's probably worth 4 cents.
No, okay, well, yeah. So you're making
definitely a very bad store of value.
Yes, well, it's all right. Let's go through the history of that as well, and how we got to banknote, because it's not immediately obvious. You're right. It's a good point. It's kind of like, well, what's this piece of paper worth then? Because the paper itself is not, as you said, it's worth 4 cents. It costs nothing to make. It's there's no value in and of itself in the piece of paper. It's the assurance of value that we get from the state that has made it its legal tender. Let's say the apocalypse hits, all your cash notes mean nothing. No one's gonna trade that for things that are inherently valuable when there's no state to ensure it as legal tender and to make sure that people can only use that. Okay, so how did we get to banknotes? So historically, like the first banks, you're the knife guy. You're Mr. Knife Man, and I'm Mr. Carrot Man. And we now trade most of our carrots and knives that we make for gold pieces, because we know that I can trade those gold pieces for whatever I want at any given moment. And I can also, because gold is now a really good store of value, I don't have to spend straight away. I can save for 2, 3, 4 years all the carrots that I sell and get lots of gold pieces. And then eventually maybe I can launch a carrot factory or something, I don't know, or a chain of carrot farms or whatever it is. But I can, acquire capital and grow, and that's also a requirement of the free market, is that you can save and then you can spend your money to expand and whatnot. So yeah, let's say that I'm saving all my gold coins and you're saving all your gold coins, and we have quite a lot of gold coins. What's a problem that you can see with this?
It's just too much to hold. I haven't got a shed big enough to hold them all.
Well, and if gold is inherently valuable, what's stopping you, who have a lot of knives, mind you, from what I've heard, from coming up to my house and sticking a knife up in my face and saying, "Give me all your gold," or even just secretly stealing it during the night? There's nothing stopping you, apart from maybe the non-aggression principle and the rest of the libertarian society. But it becomes very difficult for me to stop people taking my gold, because
so this is where banks come into play.
Correct. So banks, essentially the first banks at least, provided a service that they would store your gold, and primarily for a fee. Like you'd say, all right, you keep my gold safe, and I'll give you some small fraction of it, and that's the fee that the way that they earn their money. That's historically how banks have worked. And the first thing that they did, or rather what they'd do, so let's say I give 1,000 gold coins to my bank. What they'd do in return is, all right, well, I'll give you this little piece of paper that is an IOU to say that you have 1,000 gold coins in the bank. And this little piece of paper is called a banknote. And they'd give you lots of little banknotes, or as big a banknote as you wanted to, but these banknotes were, made by the bank, so they were difficult to forge, and they were made specifically to be, hard to replicate and easily transferable, and you could redeem them at any time for the amount of gold in the bank.
So now when I rob you with all my knives, I don't need to worry about bringing a wheelbarrow to steal all your gold. I can just hold a knife up to you and say, transfer that to me. And it's so simple.
Well, yes, that's right. And you've immediately gone the thief route. But what's essentially happened, yes, is that banknotes replaced gold as the easily transferable representation of the wealth. I no longer have to give you, 200 really heavy gold coins and go around carrying a sack of gold to buy some things, when I have a few slips of paper that are worth that amount of gold, and we know that if we go to the bank, we can get that gold out. We started trading, humans started trading with banknotes because they're much more easily transferable. They also started robbing each other for banknotes, if you really want to continue your little role play into the the knife assassin of the Wild West. But and that's basically where we get to before things started getting fucked up. And things start getting fucked up with it's called fractional reserve banking, but we probably don't need to even go that far into that today. But what essentially started to happen was that the creation of central banks around the world. And the central bank is kind of like the bank's bank. And what they began doing, it started initially they did it pre World War I, but they would essentially most countries in the world took their countries off the gold standard by World War I, which meant that no longer could you transfer banknotes for gold directly, but central banks now determined how much money there was in circulation. And after World War I, there was huge economic sort of downfall because of this. And so what they did, the US entered the world, a lot of countries in the world entered this thing called the Bretton Woods Agreement, which was essentially a return to a kind of gold standard, where the US, which had become very powerful and very influential, had decided to return its money to the gold standard, where you could keep, you could trade your money at any time, your banknotes at any time for physical gold, which meant that they couldn't print as much money as they wanted to, which means that you couldn't inflate the currency. And the rest of the world, and the US became the world reserve currency. So the rest of the world, if they wanted to trade in US dollars, couldn't just print a whole bunch of money, because the rest of the world would see that their currency was losing value, because compared to the US dollar, their currency was losing value. And so essentially, because the US was on the gold standard and the rest of the world was on the US dollar standard, the whole world was on a kind of gold standard then and there. Now,
so with the gold standard, the value of gold is the same globally? Or
well, in this case, well, the value of gold is a fixed value. Now, what changes is the value of the currencies that you're trying to exchange for that gold. If I have a gold bar now compared to a gold bar 200-300 years ago, the actual gold itself has not really increased in value. I mean, maybe there's some slight increase in value because it can be used more in electronics and stuff now, but like everyone has always thought that gold is worthwhile over time. What changes is how much the currency that you're exchanging the gold for is worth. So the fact that now gold is worth so much more and it's at an all-time high isn't a representation of the fact that gold has become more valuable. It's a representation of the fact that the currency has become less valuable. So the gold standard means that the gold is worth this, the gold is worth this amount. And what you do with the gold standard is that you set a monetary value to that. So I can't remember what it was exactly. It was $30 an ounce or something like, I can't remember. But whatever it is that you set, let's say $1,000 for a kilogram. Now, that's not accurate, but let's just say that for the sake of 1,000 to 1,000 grams. What that means is that at any point, you can trade in $1,000 for 1,000 grams of gold. Now, for a country to have this as its policy, such as the US had with the Bretton Woods Agreement, it means that they can't just print as much money as they want and fund everything that they want. Because if people were to trade in all their banknotes at any point for all the gold that's in the bank, they need to have enough gold in the bank to be able to hand it out. So what it meant was that the US needed to have in its reserves as much physical gold as it had banknotes out in the public. And because the US was doing this, according to the Bretton Woods Agreement, the rest of the world, unless they wanted their dollar, so let's say the Australian dollar, for example, we want the Australian dollar to be as valuable as we can. So we can't just print a whole lot of it, because if we print so much of the Australian dollar loses value, as it does nowadays. But the reason that we don't see it nowadays is because the rest of the countries around the world, all their currencies are losing value. So it's kind of losing value in tandem with each other. But if we're the only ones printing money, everyone can see that our dollar is losing value, because compared to the US dollar, the Australian dollar is losing value if the US dollar is following the gold standard. So the gold standard in the US meant that the rest of the countries all around the world were also held to this same gold standard by virtue of the fact that they were comparing themselves to the US dollar. So it meant that the whole world has much more sound currency at this point. What happened was, through the US first started printing more money than they had actual gold, and then the French started cashing in all their gold because they thought that the US had printed more money than they had actual gold, so they kind of called their bluff, and eventually Nixon in the 70s went off the gold standard. And what we've had since then is called fiat money. Have you ever heard what fiat money is?
I have heard of it. Don't ask me to give you a description on it.
All right, I'll give you a description.
I was learning about crypto for a little bit, and obviously fiat was the alternative, or what you're breaking away from.
Yeah, so fiat and crypto kind of does the same thing as gold. We can get into that a little bit later, but fiat, so all of this money that we've talked about thus far is hard money, money backed by something physical that tethers its value to the ground. It means it can't just be printed for free with no cost. Fiat money, which is what we have now, is money where the value of it is completely made up. Essentially what you said before, money is made up. The value of money at the moment is completely made up, and it's determined by basically how much of it is in circulation. Because if you think, as we said with the pebbles at the beginning, pebbles aren't a good form of money because there's so many of them that you can't tell the worth of everything. Everything's worth, a bajillion pebbles, and it becomes because they're so easy to access. So the more money there is in circulation, the less that money is worth. Let's say, a loaf of bread normally costs $5. And then all of a sudden, one day, the government decides everyone's going to be a millionaire now. We're giving everyone enough money to make them a millionaire. Is the loaf of bread still going to cost $5 tomorrow?
Nope.
Why not?
It'll be $100,000 because there's no value in it.
Correct. Everyone's a millionaire. What, the baker is going to continue making $5 at a time for every loaf of bread? Of course not. Everyone's got $1 million. The money has actually lost value because of the fact that it's been printed and spread so much. And so that's essentially what we have now. We have fiat currency where the money's value is determined by how much of it is in circulation. And who decides how much of it is in circulation? Well, it's the central banks of every country, which work in tandem with their government. In Australia, it's the Reserve Bank of Australia that does this. In the US, it's the Federal Reserve. There's a central bank in Europe Europe's kind of a little bit of a different situation because they all have the euro. So it kind of works in tandem with a few countries. But yeah, anyway, that's sort of the crux of the problem of what we get to eventually, which is that the US diverted away from the gold standard, which meant that the whole world diverted away from the gold standard in the 70s. And since then, all we've had is the assurance by the government that our money is worth something. It's not tethered to anything fixed, and it can be manipulated and has been manipulated by them over a period of time. Any questions? I'll sort of leave little snippets here and now for you to ask questions.
If we keep going on the trajectory that we are, how long until, or in your opinion, how long until we see a $200 note in Australia?
$200 note. Well, there's sort of two schools of thought there. One is the government hates cash. So the further forward we go, the less the government likes cash transactions, because the great advantage that cash has is that it is untraceable. If we are using cash, yes, that cash might gain and lose value on a whim of the government over the policies that they enact. But I can give you $100 for a really nice knife, and the government has no idea that we've made that trade.
Which means
you get $100. Correct. They can't tax it. They can't get their cut of us making a voluntary trade. They can't GST it. They can't income tax you. They can't figure out how many knives you've sold. You just have that money.
The reason I brought that up is because I was watching a documentary the other day on Somaliland, which is a little, part of Somalia, which isn't a recognized country or whatever. And, their inflation problem has gotten so bad that, and obviously like they don't have the access or the means for digital currency or electronic transfer. So, you go to the guy on the street, you might want, or you're getting $20 worth of something, or you're getting some cash out. And for $20, you've got a wheelbarrow full of notes, like overflowing, and you wheel that home.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, geez, imagine it. I mean, yeah, we'll be cash free in a few years' time, but yeah, that's the trajectory.
Yeah. To answer your question, we will have a $200 note if cash remains in circulation in not too long. But that's that example there is it's happened in the past, as I said before. Prior to after World War One, lots of countries didn't have a central bank, and this was before the US entered the Bretton Woods Agreement. One of the most commonly observed examples, in history classes, is that of the Weimar Republic in Germany. So pre-Hitler, the Weimar Republic in Germany was absolutely broke as shit, and they inflated their currency to try and make everyone feel less poor, and they had hyperinflation, and that was that same situation where people are wheelbarrows full of cash to go to the shops. And they used to burn, the common example is they used to burn money because it was cheaper than buying wood. The money was so worthless that it was cheaper to actually use it as firewood than it was to buy firewood, which is, this is the extreme example of what can happen with hyperinflation, where you could continue inflating your currency to the point where it loses all use as currency. A lot of Southeast Asian countries have their currency wasn't always inflated, but now they're all the notes are like 1,000 billion, baht or whatever it is. That's because of over time hyperinflation has occurred, and they've just replaced, the note with a bigger note. But so to get back to central banks and exactly what they do, especially the Reserve Bank here, there's the main harmful thing that they do is, because they work in tandem with the government, they do this thing called quantitative easing, and they've done it since 2008 quite heavily, the global financial crisis in the US. And it's basically where the government can't print its own money. This is the people who defend the government. The government doesn't print its own money. The government releases government bonds, which are then bought up by either civilians, if there's trust in the government, or increasingly, as there isn't, the Reserve Bank. So the Reserve Bank can create money and buys government bonds, gives the government the money, and has the bond, which means that the government owes it the money. So not all, but the vast majority of the debt that we have, in Australia and the US and all of that, this is debt owed to the Reserve Bank, which means that if this debt doesn't get paid, the debt is essentially a representation of how much extra money is in circulation compared to when the government started borrowing. So that the more debt there is directly correlating with how inflated the currency has become. And so inflation, generally, we think of, today, if you listen to the propaganda of the left, or anyone who sort of, the media or whatever it is, inflation is described as, this increase in prices, or inflation is occurring because we're fighting this war because Russia started a war or something. They're always obscuring the cause of inflation. Inflation is caused by having extra money in the money supply. But this sounds fairly innocuous. Okay, there's extra money in the money supply. This causes inflation. Okay, whatever. The true crime that comes out here, though, when you examine it, is, okay, the government's printed. Let's use the COVID example because it's pertinent. During COVID, the economy was stopped because the world was ending. Everyone had to stay home and not work, or if they could work from home, they could work from home. And if you couldn't work, you just got given money by the government. So loads and loads and loads of money printed and given out to people. Corporations got handed heaps and heaps and heaps of money to keep them quiet, keep them happy, keep them compliant. Media corporations included, the whole lot. Everyone's getting heaps and heaps and heaps of money from the government. Most of this money is not actually going into civilians' pockets. It's going to corporations and bureaucracy and all the big pharma, whatever it is, the war machine, Raytheon, all of that, the military industrial complex, all the people who need to get their palms greased to keep the narrative going. And so all of this extra money that's been printed during the COVID pandemic and has entered the money supply, where has the value of this new money come from? So you get $700 given to you by the government. Where has the value of this new money that's been printed come from? Where do you think?
Nowhere.
Well, it can't be nowhere, because it is real money with real value, right? The new $700 that you've been given, you can buy things with. So it has value. So where has that value come from? This is the test question. You did.
Give me the answer, Pietro.
All right. So given that all of the money in circulation has lost value by having new money put into circulation, the value of the new money has come from all of the existing money that was already there. Because while you gained an extra $700, your $10,000 that are in the bank are now worth less than $10,000 2 years ago. They're worth $7,000 from 2 years ago. They're still $10,000 officially, but their value has gone down. All of the value of everyone's savings and everyone's money that they currently hold is what's gone down. So all the value of the new money has come from these savings. So all of the money paid to corporations, paid to bureaucracies, paid to governments, paid to the war machine, paid to big pharma, all the rest of it, all of this money has come from all the money that everyone, in the public currently owns and is saving. So that's why COVID's described as the biggest transfer of wealth in human history. Yeah, they gave you $700, but they took thousands and thousands of dollars worth of value from your savings and gave them to the ultra rich and the corporations and the elites. So that's a really sort of fresh example, and they definitely scaled it up during COVID. But any time that there is any rate of inflation means the government is slowly siphoning the value of the money from your savings out to pay for the things that they want to do. So, and that's kind of quantitative easing in a nutshell, is the government, through the mechanism of using the Reserve Bank, is putting more money into circulation, and the Reserve Bank buying government bonds.
Not to mention that the people who are, supportive of this were normally the people shouting, tax the rich, the rich are getting richer. But they're obviously going for the complete wrong approach.
Yeah, the rich already get the rich. The rich already get taxed at a far higher rate than everyone else. But inflation is a tax that hits everyone equally.
Everyone, yeah.
Because, if a dollar is worth less tomorrow than it is today, that's the same for the mega rich as it is for the mega poor. And the mega poor getting hit, let's say a dollar loses 20% of its value from one day to the next. The mega rich can, especially if they're in corporations and in hand with the government, they can afford to lose 20% of their value if they're getting extra kick-ons. The mega poor, if you only have $20, losing 20% of that value is life-shattering for you. So it's a tax that hits everyone equally, which means that it affects the poor far more than it affects the rich.
It impacts your ability to buy necessities and keep a roof over your head, rather than extra activities or holidays.
And most people, they see this tax the rich thing much more deadly than not taxing the rich, is the idea that we can keep spending money on everything and keep the government, keep this symbiotic, toxic relationship between the government and the Reserve Bank alive, because that is what impoverishes everyone, every single person. And so there's two more problems with quantitative easing. The first is that they're essentially siphoning wealth from the public, or from everyone, into the hands of the government, and then the government gives it to its friends and its benefactors and the demographics of people that they want to vote from. They sort of use it for their own political gains. The second thing that quantitative easing does is it manipulates the interest rates. So it keeps them artificially low. The interest rate is essentially the price of money. So it's how much interest you have to pay if you want to borrow money. And what manipulating the interest rate does, and keeping it artificially low, or even manipulating it at all, is it stops the market from adjusting to whether it needs to be growing or restricting. So if loads of people, this gets very technical. I suppose I'll try and explain it in as simple terms as I can. If there is a period in which the interest rates are, the interest rate should be normally left to the market to decide. If the interest rate is naturally low, it means that people should be spending money because there's less value in keeping money stored. And that's when people take loans and expand their entrepreneurial empires, and there's lots of movement and excess in the market, I suppose. People start businesses and people start that sort of thing. If the interest rate is high because it costs more to loan money, it's a signal from the market to say that it's more important right now to save. And this is where, and then the market restricts to a point where the interest rates can grow again. And this kind of minute restricting and expanding of the market is how interest rates essentially work to keep everyone constantly at this middle playing level ground where the market is healthy. Because the Reserve Bank uses quantitative easing and its relationship with the government to artificially manipulate interest rates, there's no signal to the market anymore of whether it's in a moment of excess or it's in a moment of restriction. And so what they did essentially prior and including COVID, they kept interest rates so artificially low for so long. It was essentially incentivizing people to constantly spend and get into debt and spend and get into debt. And that's part of the reason why the housing market is in such a disaster, and spend and get into debt. And they were responding to a signal that the market usually gives, which is that interest rates are low. But the market wasn't giving that signal at all. In fact, the market would have been giving the opposite signal, because in fact, this was a period where the whole economy was shut and no one was creating any wealth, and society was actually becoming impoverished. And essentially what the point is that by falsifying the cost of money, which is the interest rate, the Reserve Bank gives no parameters to the market to regulate itself and to remain healthy. And what then happens is that the market now responds to the way governments and the Reserve Bank dictate policy, rather than being an independent body, which is what it would be if it had, gold as its currency, or Bitcoin, or something that is not beholden to the government or not determined by the government itself.
So talking about falsifying the interest rate,
yeah.
Can you just clarify or like summarize what dictates what the interest rate should actually be, regardless of the falsifying of it?
So in a normal market economy, let's say we had a market based on gold, what would determine the interest rate is, so what determines the price of anything in a market is demand and supply and demand, and kind of loads and loads and loads of different interactions and relationships of buying and selling, then eventually give you an average kind of price that comes out. And the interest rate is this, over loads and loads and loads of interactions, there would be a pretty consistent rate in which people are giving out loans and receiving loans. And this is determined, and this is kind of how the beauty of the market and how the market works. It's through countless exchanges. They eventually level out to a median plane, and that gives you roughly the value of something. And the interest rate is simply the cost of money. It's simply the price of money. Like with the price of anything else, when there's lots of demand for money, then the price goes up. And when there's not much demand for it, the price goes down. And the interest rate is simply the price of money. So when there's lots of, when there's lots of demand for money, the price goes up, which means that the interest rate goes up. And then once that's gotten up to a point that's too high, this is telling you, as an entrepreneur, right now is not a great time to take on a loan and start a business. So right now is the time to save your money and wait for that interest rate to lower. And then when the demand for money goes down and the interest rate lowers, because there's a lower demand for the money, the rate lowers, less people are borrowing money, it'll lower to a point where you think is acceptable. And then you think, all right, now's the time to take out a loan and invest in my business. And so the interest rate is this. It's determined by the market to tell people essentially, is it worthwhile to borrow money right now to expand my operations? And
so by handing out free money willy-nilly, that kills all supply and demand.
Yes.
And allows them to falsify it.
Yeah. And yes, essentially, you hear now all the time is the Reserve Bank raising interest rates? Is the Reserve Bank lowering them? This is a mechanism that is decided by a few people now, which should be decided by all of the market together at once through not a decision, but through exchange. Whereas right now they're guessing at it. They're trying to guess what the correct interest rate should be and forcing the market to follow it because they have taken control of the currency and they've taken control of how money works. Money should be completely independent of a government. People still think of, this leads to the third big impact, a negative impact of quantitative easing. And that's that historically, if we thought of not fiat currency, let's imagine that we had a gold standard. How does the government spend money? Well, the government spends money either by issuing government bonds and people buy these, but then the government has to pay those back because it's not just held by the Reserve Bank, it's held by people. And if it doesn't pay them back, then no one's ever going to buy more government bonds in the future, or by taxing people. That is historically how the state has worked in spending money. So let's say I'm the government of Australia. If I want to spend money on this new railroad or these new, whatever the fuck's 10 billion new schools or whatever it is, I'm going to need to find ways to get that money. And the public's not going to be particularly happy of an increase in tax. So I am far more accountable for how that money is spent because people are directly seeing an impact on their taxes. And that might lose me the next election. Historically, this is how it would work if there was a fixed supply of money, a fixed standard. Nowadays, taxes are, the government doesn't have to raise taxes to pay for its 10 billion new things. So we are taxed at an enormous rate anyway, but the government doesn't actually need to tax us to pay for whatever policy it wants to implement to try and win over its particular demographic. All it does is through quantitative easing, gets money from the Reserve Bank, and the value of that money comes from your money anyway, so it's indirectly taxing us. It's stealing the value of our money without ever showing us an on-paper increase in taxes. So people think, oh, the Labour Party's paying for all these things, or the Liberal Party or the Greens or whoever it is paying for all these new things, but it's not having a direct impact on me. Of course I want these new things. Now, the impact is on you and on everyone else anyway through inflation, but what it's done is it's removed any political cost from paying for anything that the government wants. There is no longer, if we wanted to send more, the example with the war right now, we're sending billions of dollars or close to $1 billion to Ukraine, a war we have nothing to do with, to fight against Russia, a power we have nothing to do with, and arguably which the West provoked into a war. Why are we sending $1 billion into there? If the government had to directly tax people to send this money over there, you can imagine there'd be way more of an uproar. But most people aren't even aware of the fact that we're sending money to Ukraine, or how much money, or what percentage of that is taxed from each individual, because it's not seen directly. It's done indirectly and hidden through taxes. And everything the government does has now no political cost to it anymore, because it doesn't have to raise taxes. So it can do anything that it likes. And
as Topher clarified when we interviewed him, is tax is extortion, inflation is theft, which I thought was a really good analogy. One's being done without you knowing, and the other one is, you're aware of it and you don't realize how bad it actually is.
Yes, and that's right. So taxation is extortion in the sense that he's saying, yes, if you refuse to pay taxes for long enough, eventually someone with a gun comes to your house and either throws you in prison or takes the money off you, which is true. But if you extort, even the mafia knows this. If you, because that's essentially the primary culprits of extortion in, I suppose the what's it called? Social media, not social media, the public perception. If they were to extort too much from a particular group of people, that group of people would eventually rebel or try go somewhere else or something else. Now, the public's best way of rebelling is to vote in a different government, because we have a democracy. So if they were to extort too much money, or an amount of money that was deemed unacceptable, then the public would rebel. But they don't need to, because they now extort the same amount they've extorted over periods of time in terms of a percentage of wages. but they steal all the extra money that they need through inflation and pay for, you know, everything else through inflation. And inflation, you know, even if you look at their official numbers, is now through the roof, which means that that's, you know, last year or something, it was like 8-10% or something. Their official numbers, which means it's far more than that. That means that's 10% of every dollar you've ever earned has been taken off you. That's a lot more than taxes ever do all in one hit. Taxes take some percent of your money now, and then on the money that you've saved, it gets taken, the value of that gets taken from inflation. It's how much of the market is actually free in this point? Almost none of it. How much of your money is actually the value of what you've earned through your work or through your trade or whatever it is.
And I think that's what a lot of people don't really understand, or they don't realize how bad it is because, like you say, a tax increase impacts money earned in the future. Inflation impacts everything you currently own.
Yeah. Everything dollar you've ever earned.
Yeah.
Yes. And what it does is it basically causes people to spend their money immediately, which is also part of the point of quantitative easing. If your money is going to be worth less tomorrow and the next day, everyone's constantly buying things because you're trying to find a store of value. You're trying to store the value of that money because you know that keeping it in a bank is not going to do anything, because it's just going to go down in value there. So essentially, yeah, that's kind of the crux of the three big impacts of quantitative easing and how the government is fucking with all your money and all the rest of it. And there's talk now of central bank digital currency. That's kind of their latest talking point, which would be to remove any sort of remove all cash from the system and turn the entire source of currency to just a digital currency run by the central bank. So they can essentially tax and inflate and whatever it is with far less accountability, because you don't even get to see the numbers. You don't even need to see the numbers. Your number is just this number on a screen. And the bigger fear with that also is that with a central bank digital currency, they can basically shut you off if you have a dissenting opinion.
Yeah, just quickly, that's also the government's like admission to the fact that they were slowly losing the war to cryptocurrency and decentralized currency, is by saying, hey, we can do that as well. But, you know, obviously they're in control.
Yeah, so cryptocurrency does the same thing as gold in a sense, because it's finite and it's easily transferable if you live in that world. And the idea with cryptocurrency is that it could be an alternative to government currency. And that's kind of this idea of parallel societies, is where you know, all the normies live within the government and use the government's money, and everyone else lives with cryptocurrency and ignores government money and basically doesn't even own any of it, just does all their trade and purchasing and stuff with cryptocurrency. You just need lots and lots of people to take up the cryptocurrency. Difference being that cryptocurrency doesn't have inherent value in and of itself. The value would still be what people project. The fact that people see value in it is what gives it value. But if it were used as a currency, it would have this value.
It's currently seen as an investment by our government rather than a currency.
Yes. And most people still use the value of Bitcoin is so malleable at the moment still, because it's not the value of Bitcoin according to how it is used in the exchange. It's subject to fads. Like if it becomes really popular, it goes up and skyrockets in price and everyone tries to buy it as a get rich quick scheme.
And then people withdraw a fuckload of it because they've made a shitload of money and then the price just plummets.
Correct. None of that has anything to do with using it as a parallel economy.
No.
That's one of the sort of kinks that exist within it now. That Bitcoin specifically in terms of cryptocurrency. But yes, the central bank digital currency is the government realizing, hey, look, there's a market for this. They want this. What we'll get ahead of it and do it first. But it's horrific. Like, that's as dystopian as you can get, because it would mean that they can tax as much as they want, raise taxes, lower taxes, whatever, without you ever having an input. They can lower the amount of currency in existence, pay all their corporate friends and all their special interest groups and whoever they want without you ever even needing to see it. You can't make any transactions outside of the government. So all of the black market would cease to exist. You couldn't do cashies. You couldn't pay someone if you disagree with the government, or if you don't want to get taxed for something or whatever. You can't possibly pay anyone using cash, because the cash would be outlawed. And what's even worse than that is that they could shut you off for having dissenting opinions. Now, that might seem like a far-fetched idea. During COVID, we would have been shut off. Most of libertarians around the world would have been shut off. Joe Rogan would have been shut off. They actually shut off the protesters in Canada. Yeah, that's a horrific example of exactly what's coming. So those protesters, which were painted as terrorists, and if anyone looked on their Instagram page and followed the Freedom Convoy at any point, saw that they were literally like just hundreds of thousands of the normalest, family-friendly people ever, who were protesting against the mandates and did a peaceful protest, and they were partying in the streets and whatever, and it was all the most peaceful thing in the world. They were labeled terrorists, and their bank accounts were frozen. And with a central bank digital currency, it becomes even easier for that, and it can become, if you share an opinion online that's wrong, or if you use the wrong pronouns or whatever it may be, they can shut you off, and it's completely arbitrary and completely to the whims of the government. And if there's one thing that, as I said before, currency needs to be for it to work well, and for the free market to work, and for the broader public to become richer and wealthier, it's for it to be decentralized and be completely separate to the government. And a central bank digital currency would be completely beholden to the government. So that's the beginning of the end. If that happens, that is the beginning of the end. And that is how the state and the government essentially ruins everything, is that they have control of the money supply.
Mm-hmm. And in the meantime, the only things we hear about combating inflation is like Albanese's election promise, 5% pay increase. And what did you see the instant that pay increase happened? Prices everywhere went up.
Yeah.
By more than 5%.
The US's response was to pass an omnibus bill, which was the Inflation Reduction Act. Omnibus bill is a bill that has, some aspect of something, so they would have paid everyone a certain amount of money, and then passes 10,000 other things all together, and everyone votes it through because Republicans, Democrats both have things they want in it. And it was called the Inflation Reduction Act. Like, the reduction of inflation is something that's going to come from the government is absurd.
Yeah.
And
all these other acts that were passed at the same time, I'm certain we're just feeding into inflation.
Oh yeah, and it would have been passing more money for the military-industrial complex to keep the Republicans and their not even their constituents, their funders happy, and some fucking woke shit to keep the Democrats happy, and probably some new nappies for Biden because he's old and decrepit and has dementia and fucking shat himself at the Vatican. Have you heard that story? There was a rumor a year or two ago that Biden shat himself at the Vatican, and I'm all about it. I don't care if it's not true. I'm gonna perpetuate it. I'm nastier than normal because I was thinking about the fact that I'm getting poorer every day and the government's stealing all my money, and nobody seems to notice. But that's it. That's kind of everything. There's more we could talk about. No, I'm not even going to get into the other stuff. That's kind of the broad strokes of how the government is stealing all of our money, and why Austrian economists and libertarians need to exist is to tell everyone, hey, it's fucked. It's all fucked.
In no uncertain terms.
I have never been, I'm not certain of a lot of things in my life. I've never been more certain than the fact that it is fucked.
Like always, you know what would fix this?
What?
No government intervention.
I thought you were going to say
government involvement.
Yeah. Oh, as I thought you were going to say, firebombing government buildings like you did last time.
Well,
but no, as I said last time, that wouldn't fix this. It'd just make us feel better about ourselves.
And I've had the AFP knocking on my door every day since I said that.
Yeah, I think it's a testament to quite how small our viewership is that we can often and loudly say things like firebomb government buildings and no one's come knocking on our door.
Well, hopefully these couple of educational episodes get out there a little bit more, and there might be some kid at school saying, "What is inflation?" YouTube might find this, hopefully.
Yeah, well, that's right. If you are one of our 2.5 viewers, do share and pass around our educational episodes, especially the other ones. I mean, we're just shit talking what's happening or interviewing someone interesting, but these ones, the idea is to I guess spread the message, kind of the crux of why we got into this thing in the first place. That's about all I had to say. Is there anything else you wanted to say, Max?
I think it's going to take me a little while to digest all that information, but it has been informative.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Maybe you can do an an educational episode next time. Is there something you could educate all of us on?
Oh, geez, Pietro, put me on the spot.
Sorry.
I'm still trying to work out how many knives I can trade for a carrot.
Well, you can do a little presentation on knife building, little blacksmithing knife presentation.
Yeah, nice. And you can teach us how to make carrots.
How to make they grow, actually. Well, lesson 1, they actually grow. You knife making plebs don't even know how carrots work. Go eat some knives. I wonder how that'll do for your longevity.
Well, if I did, I wouldn't have to worry about inflation.
Yeah, they should just use knives as currency. That's a good currency.
Yeah.
Just loads of, well, I suppose no one needs loads of knives. But knives is transferable. Probably you cut yourself while you're carrying a bunch of them around, but I'll
transferable
think about it.
In what way? Like stabby?
You're transferable directly to the guts. No, as if you could easily exchange a certain number of them, big knives, small knives.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Awesome.
If you don't already, subscribe to us on YouTube, like us on Instagram, do the Spotify, all the rest of it. Give us a good review on Spotify. That's also a thing you can do. Some of you guys already done that. I noticed we have like a few of those, and
I think we're sitting at 5-star average.
Yeah, so don't ruin that. You. All right. That's it for today. We'll catch you next time.
Catch you.